Ms. Thomas. Dear colleagues, participants, let me begin by welcoming each and every one of you again very much to this third of our technical webinar in the series of webinars that we are organizing for the purpose of getting information relating to the possible development of a multidimensional vulnerability index for small island developing states. Now, so far we've had two good sessions. We've heard from the presenters insights into how they think and why they have developed their webinar and their justification, including their views regarding self-inflicted factors, so to speak. We've heard presentations relating to the possible improvement of the current MVIs and how it relates to small island states. And we've also had a certain insight into how the users of the current MVIs use these indices and their views on how it could be also improved. And also we've heard the presentations making a strong case relating to the universal approach to a multi-vulnerability index. So far, discussion has been good. Our observation regarding the exchanges, while we've heard some very good questions and interactions from some familiar voices, and as was earlier mentioned by Ms. Thomas, we are really encouraging everyone that you may have a question regarding any of the previous presentation or today's presentation to please raise your hand and do speak out. And I'm sure there are people in this audience who can share views on the issue. Now, this morning we are very privileged and honored indeed that we have with us the representatives from the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. We're very happy to have with us Mr. Rahul Sengupta, the Program Management Officer. And also we have with us the Chief Environmental Economist from the United Nations Environmental Program, Dr. Pushpam Kumar, who will be making presentations to us this morning. We are extending to both of you a very warm welcome, particularly to our colleagues in Nairobi. We are grateful because of the time difference. We acknowledge your time and are grateful indeed that you can spare this moment to come and brief this webinar. So with these few words, Ms. Thomas, please, I give the floor back to you.
Thank you, Sai, for those brief introductory remarks. Colleagues, we have a very good team today with us. We're going to do a little bit of going back to conceptual sort of approaches and thinking as we look at perhaps the constituent parts of an MVI. And we've invited UNEP and UNDRR to address different parts of the questions that have come up and concerns and comments that have come up with over the last two webinars. So we're going to get started with Dr. Kumar, who is ready to go. Dr. Kumar, you can share your screen. Are you able to do so, or do you need us to do so with your presentation? If you can share your screen and we're ready to go whenever you are. Which would you prefer?
Thanks, Anya. No, I can share myself. And let me.
Right, over to you then. Thank you.
Just a second. Thanks very much. Can you see the screen? If not here.
Yes, we can see the screen, but could you start the slideshow, because we're seeing the universal view. So if you click on slideshow, it would be in the toolbar. Slideshow. It's after animations. Go take the cursor up where you see home, insert, draw, design, transitions, animation, slideshow. Right up, right up. Dr. Kumar at the top where you see, oh, what happened?
I can't see it easily. Just a second, it should come.
There we go. All right. If you look at the top of the, the PowerPoint screen where you see, I think you've stopped sharing again. And we see here you can also click F5 to start the slideshow. But you've stopped sharing your screen though.
No, it is on. So here we go. And then
here we go. And then click F5.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Can you see this now? Or it's not coming the full one?
Click if you click on F5, it should give us. There you go. Ready to go. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. And sorry, colleagues, for this. Because initially I was not getting the permission to share the screen, and then I got confused how to go ahead. So thanks, Anya, thanks, Sai and colleagues from the SIDS Secretariat in UNDESA. Very happy to do these presentations. This presentation will be slightly different from the earlier one, but I'm more than sure that this theme, the approach which I'm going to share with you, is not new to the colleagues who are based in UNDESA office. The reason I'm saying, because this presentation gives you the economic dimension of vulnerability. This basically tells you that the sustainability of island states are so much dependent on natural resources or natural assets, or even call it natural capital, which economists love to talk about. Whether it is tourism, whether it is their water, whether it is agriculture, whether it is their extractive sectors in the small islands. They are not homogeneous entirety. Every island has a different character, a different base for the economy. But one thing is very common, that all of them are heavily dependent upon natural capital. Most of their income, the flow of income or economic services and goods, are directly or indirectly derived from natural capital. So it is very relevant that whenever we talk about any index for vulnerability of those island states, we must include or think about natural capital or natural asset dimension. Otherwise, the long-term viability, sustainability of the island states are under real threat. If we don't include diversity, the climate change, the quality of land, the topsoil, the water, and the quality of the coast and marine until 13, 14 nautical miles, I think we are questioning the very viability of the economic activity within that state. The title is Tracking Sustainability Through Wealth Measurement in SIDS. By design, I'm saying wealth, I'm not saying income, because as a logic, income flows from wealth, number one. I mean, income will be low if wealth or the stock of wealth is low, or the quality of wealth is poor, and income will be much better and resilient. The wealth is in a good shape. Second, when we talk about sustainability, please remember that to the future generation, we are not going to pass income. We are going to pass wealth. So we have to talk about wealth. And third, I mean, this is a kind of analogy that whenever we talk about the vulnerability of any state, any country, nation, or even the household, we have to think about the foundations. I think IMF executive director sometimes back when we were doing this presentation was she drew a very nice analogy saying that income is something like a house, nice paintings, window, suited booted people. But if the base of the house is full of mud and sand, we are in trouble. And here we must know what is the quality of sand and the mud on which this house is based, and that is wealth. And that means not only natural capital, it includes produced capital, it includes human capital too. So 3 types of capitals will form the base for the total wealth, or what we call inclusive wealth. So for any vulnerability index, we have to talk about the natural capital and other types of capital, of course. So with that, humans, and especially humans in the small island states, they are absolutely embedded in nature. And that's why measurement of nature is so critical, so important. If we can't measure them, we can't manage them. Second, sustainability requires taking stock of the production base, not just income or GDP. So if we want a long-term sustainability of any unit, whether it is SIDS nation, we have to know what is the production base, and basically 3 types of capital. There could be trade-offs among different types of capital, but in order to resolve them, we also need to know each type of capital, which are basically a component of the wealth. Sustainability and human well-being improvements require that we know the assets, the way you try to know the asset for a business firm. They have the balance sheet. So each SIDS country should have their own balance sheet, and that will be basically inclusive wealth. Wealth which includes produced or manufactured capital, human capital, and natural capital. By design, I will not talk much about human capital and the produced capital. By no means they are unimportant or less important. But coming from UNEP, I will keep my lens and focus on natural capital. Now, why natural capital or why wealth? The science, the economists have been saying about it, that if you really want to talk about sustainability, you have to talk about wealth. You have to talk about capitals. You can see on the science side, you have plenty of economists, and my colleagues and friends who are in this call or webinar, they would recognize immediately who are these guys. More than half of them are Nobel laureates. They have been raising their voice that for any household, any unit, or any nation, and here in this case, SIDS, if you really want to know their sustainability and their status, you have to know their wealth. And you come to the other agencies like UN, you have the World Conference 1992, Rio plus 20, paragraph 38. You have SDG, which we all work and strongly believe, and rightly so. Now, you have seen CRE region and beyond GDP initiatives. You have IPBES, Intergovernmental Platform for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. SIA, last month, I think the Secretary General endorsed and member states accepted. And in that new SIA framework, natural capital has a primary role so that we don't ignore the contribution of natural capital to sustainability and well-being of the people, especially in the SIDS context. One of the things, and then there are plenty of individual countries initiatives. Not to forget about the Sarkozy's government's Stiglitz report. And on 2nd of February, UK's HM Treasury has come out with the review, and that also strongly talks about wealth, inclusive wealth, and natural capital. So why I'm talking about these initiatives and the scientific citations to drive the point that if we want to talk about sustainability, we must talk about natural capital besides other capitals. And in the context of SIDS, it is so pronounced, so explicit that probably it does not require any further elaborations. Again, we have talked about it. UNEP, just to let you know, and the colleagues who are from the very beginning, and it is next year we will be 50 years old. You can see the Secretary General here and Maurice Strong, Executive Director then of UNEP, talking about the need to think about natural assets and moving beyond GDP. But also in 1987, our common future, Stiglitz report, and a range of other reports, including the latest from UK government, they talk about wealth, inclusive wealth, and natural capital. And in that context, let me clarify, when we talk about natural capital, you have both renewables and non-renewables. You have human capital, you have produced capital. I will focus on natural capital. Would like to share some of the latest findings from UNEP's Inclusive Wealth Report. Why those findings? Because this is a continuous effort. The first report we did in Rio plus 20, which was launched there. And then in 2014 and 2019, we are working towards 2022 reports, where you have a status of natural capital of the world. In fact, probably the only comprehensive status on natural capital of the world. I mean, the last report for 140 countries, 140, and basically the theory is that, look, natural capital, produced capital, and human capital, they are responsible for all production and consumption, which are responsible for human welfare. So that is the assumption, forget about this part. What is important to remember that for sustainability, we must know in the wealth, the stock of capital of all types, of course. So a combination of produced, natural, and human capital and their change per capita over a period of time will tell you in which direction we are moving. I will focus on natural capital here. Just to borrowing from the latest report from UNEP on natural capital, you can see from 1992 to 2013-14, produced capital is on rise, human capital, and so is GDP, but natural capital is on decline. For 140 countries, average, natural capital is on decline. In fact, there is estimate that more than 30% decline has been experienced in natural capital, which is again a composite index of renewable and non-renewable. What it also means, our estimates, as I said, that for only 58 countries out of 40 are experiencing positive growth in wealth. Rest are showing decline in wealth. What it means in a simple terms, that we are treating wealth as our income. We are eating our fixed assets and treating them as income. And that is a very dangerous sign. That is a bad economics, especially for sustainability. If the purpose is sustainability of any unit, household or the nation or the SIDS countries. When we analyze, I'm coming to the SIDS country in a minute, but just to give you the general conventional measurement like GDP. So here we go. You have various countries. You have on the x-axis, you have wealth. On the y, you have GDP per capita. And on x-axis, you have wealth per capita. You will find that many countries are showing positive GDP, but you have illusionary gains in income, but basically you are eroding the forest, topsoil, groundwater, coastal, marine natural resources, cropland, wetlands, whatever. I mean, natural capital has a, there are certain, well-defined natural capital or assets, and all these things come under natural capital. Of course, biodiversity too. And we are eroding them and treating them as income. Many countries with positive GDP are degrading their wealth. Again, you can see some of this, the GDP is positive, but they are showing negative wealth. Come to the SIDS. And I must confess, in this report, we don't have a comprehensive picture for all the SIDS countries. So but we do have for some. You have Belize, you have Barbados, Dominican Republic, Fiji, Guyana, Haiti, Jamaica, Maldives, Papua New Guinea, and Singapore. And they are SIDS nations, as you can see. For these nations, almost except Guyana, maybe due to this petroleum and other minerals, all other countries are showing net decline in their per capita natural capital. If you see their GDP, I'm coming to that. GDP is positive for them. So what is the problem? What is the implications? It means we are short-sighted in our analysis and sustainability discourse for these island nations. We are treating destruction of natural capital as our income, while we are eroding the base of the economy, that their long-term sustainability is under threat. By the way, in this analysis, if you see, this is a report on UNEP's website. You can see the methodology. We have also taken the climate change factor into it. So climate change induced erosion of natural capital also acting here. Natural capital, if we don't bring into our discourse of sustainability and vulnerability, because in the long run, we are going to compromise the health and resilience of the economy of these island states. Let us try to see the natural capital. For all these 8-9 states, which we considered, for which we got the data readily from our reports, at least for natural capital, GDP is all positive, but natural capital is declining. Now, many of you might have the question, and hold your question for a moment. Oh, what is wrong with that? If we can grow our GDP, even if natural capital is declining, and as long as we can substitute some of the decline in natural capital, probably for some time, for some certain range, you can substitute. But as is well known in science, as is well known even in economics, that natural capital cannot be substituted by produced capital infinitely. And that is the whole question going to Meadows et al. And J. Forresters of 1970s and limit to growth, which has been reflected in Brundtland report, which has been reflected in many UN documents, the future we want, even in SDG. I think the way we are treating indicate targets, those concerns are low. GDP rising and natural capital declining is a bad sign. We must address this. Finally, I know there will be plenty of questions, and I think some of the elaborations I would do in the light of your questions and comments. For any multi-dimensional vulnerability index for the SIDS, which is a great idea, we must incorporate the status of inclusive wealth or natural capital. Or if you do inclusive wealth, I mean, in terms of data, it might be slightly demand, but not much. It will be really strengthening and enriching these MVIs and making it more sustainable and more reliable, more credible as far as sustainability discourse goes. So I think my big message, or probably humble submission, based upon a number of scientists, economists, individual and national efforts coming for last 35 years, latest being from UK's government, and the science behind this UNEP's report that dimensional vulnerability index must embrace and recognize the status of natural capital, because this is probably one of the surest way to ensure the sustainability of the island states. I think with that, I will stop and will be happy to take your comments, questions, or suggestions. I will stop, Anya, here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kumar, very much. I think some unrefutable arguments raised in your presentation this morning, but I do suspect you'll have quite a few questions from the floor, and then we can take that accordingly. We're going to jump right in now to the next set of presenters, our colleagues from UNDRR, please. Can you make yourselves visible on the screen? Dr. Kumar, if you don't mind, if you can stop sharing your screen. Right, okay. So Laurel and the team, please, if you can also turn your videos on if you're ready to go, and please introduce yourselves. We have 3 colleagues from UNDRR with us this morning. Over to you, please. Thank you. Laurel, your mic is muted if you're speaking, not sure.
Oh, this is Rahul speaking, actually. Thank you. So, Laurel, if you can put it on the agenda. Thank you so much. So, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, colleagues. Firstly, our gratitude to our host, DESA, SIDS Secretariat, for inviting us and giving us this opportunity to speak today and meet with you. Thank you so much. So we will today focus on, as we've been told, to look at and go back to the basics, look at some of the conceptualization of terminology, look at some of the indicators that and targets and indicators that form the foundation of the globally accepted Sendai frameworks monitoring system. And we will also speak about the global risk assessment framework that UNDR is working on. So I'll just take a minute to just introduce ourselves. Laura, yeah, thank you so much. So the first agenda item on the work of the OIEWG, I know it's a mouthful, it stands for the Open-Ended Intergovernmental Expert Working Group on Terminology and Indicators for Disaster Risk Reduction. That will be presented by my colleague Laurel from our New York office. Then we have the Sendai Framework Monitoring. This will be presented by myself. I'm based in Bonn, and my colleague Andrew will be who's based in Geneva, will be speaking on the Global Risk Assessment Framework. So without much ado, I'll hand over to my colleague Laurel. Thank you so much.
Hi there, let me know if you can hear me. I hope that you can. As Rahul had mentioned, so we wanted to present on the work of the Open-Ended Intergovernmental Expert Working Group on Indicators and Terminology related to disaster risk reduction. So this work was established by the General Assembly in Resolution 69/284, as you can see on the slide. It occurred between September 2015 and November 2016 in Geneva, and experts that participated in the work from member states were nominated by member states, and the work was supported by UNDRR. It was chaired by the government of Jamaica, and fundamentally it discussed questions related to the definition of global indicators and terminology, and also questions related to the overlap in the monitoring of the Sendai framework and the Sustainable Development Goals. As Rahul will discuss later in the presentation, the Sendai framework shares indicators with Sustainable Development Goals 1, 11, and 13. So some key terminology that we wanted to present that has been endorsed by the General Assembly in 71/276 resolution. This slide is really just some terms that we felt might be relevant to the work on the MVI. And so here we've pulled out those definitions that have been endorsed by member states. So just to read a few aloud, so disaster is defined as a serious disruption of the functioning of a community or a society at any scale due to hazardous events interacting with conditions of exposure, vulnerability, and capacity, leading to one of the more of the following: human, material, economic, and environmental losses and impacts. So that is different than hazard, which is a process, phenomenon, or human activity that may cause loss of life, injury, or other health impacts, property damage, social and economic disruption, or environmental degradation. Other key terminology that might be of relevance to the group: prevention, resilience, underlying disaster risk drivers, and vulnerability. So these are just the definitions that have been endorsed by member states and were developed through the work of the OIEWG on terminology and indicators related to disaster risk reduction. After I'm done, I'll put those in the chat. I'll put a link to the report as well as the General Assembly resolution that endorsed the report. And with that, I will turn over to my colleague Rahul for the rest of the presentation before Andrew. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Laura. I'm just sharing my screen. I just want to confirm you can see my screen.
Not quite yet.
Not yet. Okay. I'll try again. Is it on?
Yep, we can see it now.
Okay, great. So as I mentioned, I will talk about the Sendai framework monitoring. Just to give an overview, given the time, we will talk about the larger or the high level points on this. Firstly, we will go through the global Sendai framework targets. We will explain, what the targets are and how the indicators are lining up, but we may not have time to go through all the indicators, but we will give you a flavor of that. Secondly, wanted to share with you, as Laurel mentioned, the linkage of where the Sendai framework and the SDGs meet. So basically, UNDR is the custodian agency for all the disaster risk reduction related indicators of the Sustainable Development Goals. So which are common in terms of the Sendai frameworks, specific Sendai framework indicators, which we will go through. Thirdly, we will quickly go through two other modules that we have in the indicator system. One is the custom regional targets and indicators, which are to do with the country's own, customized indicators, and the other is the regional one, which is more at the regional level, at a multi-country, but at the regional level. So that's our lay of the land as far as this part of the presentation goes. So in terms of global targets that we have, before actually going into the targets, just wanted to give you in one or two words what these 7 targets are about. Because when you go into too many long target articulation of targets, it loses the essence sometimes. So basically, what are we talking about? So we have a target A, talking about mortality, global mortality. Target B, of course, mortality from directly attributed to disasters from natural hazards. B, it talks about people affected from these disasters. C is about the economic estimation of the losses that are incurred by the countries. Target D is about the critical infrastructure and basic services that are disrupted. So the infrastructures that are lost, destroyed, and damaged, and basic services that are disrupted. Target E is a very important one because it's kind of the essence of on which the other targets are built. It's about the national and local disaster risk reduction strategies. And one thing unique about Target E is, while the other 6 targets are aimed for 2030, this is one target that has been set and matured in 2020. The reason being that if we have good, strong national DRR strategies, the countries can work better towards risk reduction in terms of achieving the other 6 targets. But of course, as we all know, a good strategy is just a necessary condition. It's not a sufficient condition. There is a very important need of operationalization of implementation of those strategies, which is very critical, and capacities and the resources that are required. So that's why the disaster risk reduction strategies are very, very the essential foundation for the, you can say, the whole target system. Then we move on to target F, which is about international cooperation. So this is where the donor countries basically say how much they have put in terms of not only ODA, but also non kind of financial, in terms of programmatic terms, for capacity development initiatives that they have put in place in support of the developing countries. And at the same time, we have recipient countries talking about how they are, what they have received in the reporting period. Then lastly, we move to target G, which is essentially talking about what are the early warning systems and the risk information that countries have access to, and how their citizens are being able to the extent that they are being able to make use of that early. It covers early warnings, early action, and risk information assessments, the whole gamut of initiatives that are required in terms of preparatory work that is, again, the foundation for disaster risk reduction. So what are the exact targets behind these focus areas? So global target A, as mentioned about mortality, is to do with substantially reducing mortality by 2030. Target B is about substantially reducing the number of affected people globally by 2030. C is to reduce the direct economic loss, and that's very important, the direct economic loss in relation to global GDP. And that is because, there are different methodologies of looking at economic losses. So you can look at, how one particular loss to a particular, industry or factory could actually give or lead to more losses down in the supply chain. That here we are focused very much on the direct loss that is incurred by the different industries. Target D is to do with substantially reducing the losses of critical infrastructure and disruption of services, basic services, which primarily is to do with health services, education services, and other basic public goods. Public services that are provided. The target E, I explained, is to do with national and local DRR strategies. So there's one indicator focusing on whether the country has a national DRR strategy, and there are 10 key elements against which it is measured in terms of how aligned the strategy is to the Sendai framework. And also, we see in this how many of the local governments have a local DRR strategy. Which basically means, and it's to define a local government, it would basically mean the lowest administrative unit of the government that has the authority to work on or has the responsibility for disaster risk reduction, has the authority and the required budgets to work on disaster risk reduction, and that is taken as the local governments. And from there, the measurement is to see how many of them have the disaster risk reduction strategies in place. The next is, as I mentioned here, about targeted. It's more to do about the what countries are contributing, developed countries are contributing, and the recipient countries are receiving. Of course, there are also some countries who, on one hand, have provided funding and other capacity development initiatives, but on the other hand, in some ways, they have also received. So we've got the entire spectrum of countries in that. And lastly, again, as I mentioned, target G is about looking at the multi-hazard, and that's to underline that the multi-hazard early warning systems that are involved, the risk information and risk assessment. And you'll hear from my colleague Andrew about the global risk assessment framework that UNDR is working on. Which also is related, very closely related to this target. Moving on, but it's very. This is again what my colleague Laurel said, is how our basic aim here is to ensure that there is limited reporting fatigue on countries. That you have one reporting requirements on the SDGs, you have one requirements on the Sendai framework, and then there are some others from the regional perspective. So how many can the same countries, same departments be responsible for? So as I mentioned, the advantage of being having these aligned is that they report only once in the Sendai framework, and the same reporting is used to provide into the Sendai SDG framework. So these are the 5 indicators that we are articulated as per the SDGs. However, you will see these interconnected lines, which eventually entail going into 11 indicators of the SDG. So 5 are unique indicators which fall under different targets, and there are a total of 11. So just to quickly go through those 5 indicators. So first is the number of deaths, missing persons, and persons affected per 100,000. Second is the disaster economic loss in relation to GDP, which is related to target C. Then the direct disaster economic loss relation to GDP, including disaster damage to critical infrastructure and disruption. So you see, there are different indicators which are related to the different targets of Sendai framework on one hand, and on the other, they are related to different targets of the goals, and the goals being goal 1 or no poverty, goal 11 on sustainable cities, and goal 13 on climate action. Moving forward, the fourth one is about the national number of countries with national and local DRR strategies, again target E, and the last one is to do with the local governments, the proportion of local governments that adopt that have, as I mentioned, a clear indicator on how many what percentage of local governments have local DRR strategies. Moving forward. So this is just, if I could stay on this slide for a minute and just talk about a bit about the small and developing states. And I especially wanted to highlight one very important point from the point of view of the national DRR strategies. We have seen that it's true that many SIDS, small and developing states, are not probably being able to monitor and report on a very regular basis on this. However, they have one of the best practice on having the national DRR strategies, and not only the DRR strategies, but those that are aligned with the climate change strategies. So these are some of the best ones actually come from the SIDS. And this is where we are working very closely through our regional offices to support and promote their best practice, but also help them to ensure that the good and the successes that they are having on the ground are also being reported through this mechanism, so that others also come to know, and there is a good learning opportunity from that. So this is where we are slowly increasing that. We've got now more than 25%. We have the last report from the targeted report from last year. We had about 24% of the SIDS were reporting. This is SIDS who are UN member states, but these numbers have been increasing now, and we have just recently got the latest data, which we are analyzing now. But numbers are just on the increase. Next is we are looking at the last slide in terms of this part of the presentation. We have two other types of targets and indicators, apart from the global ones, that are enshrined in the Sendai framework itself. One is the custom targets and indicators. Basically, it was seen that we have 38 indicators under the 7 targets. However, this is of course was a long process of deliberation among the member states, and hence it was, as one can imagine, it wasn't just one morning that they came up with 38 targets and they agreed. There was a very clear understanding that many countries wanted many more targets and different targets that were applicable for themselves. So then the consensus was that beyond the 38 that were agreed, could the countries also provide their own indicators and targets which are true for their context. And that is why the term of the custom targets and indicators were coined, and these were integrated into the Sendai framework monitor. So what are the advantages of this? That these are nationally identified targets and indicators, and they are related to the 4 priorities. So these, not to the 7 targets per se, but to the 4 priorities of the Sendai framework. Secondly, the member states can measure their progress by actually creating these targets and indicators themselves, or choosing them from a menu that is provided in the system. These targets and indicators also provide a mechanism for actually monitoring the national disaster reduction strategies, because it's one thing to just say, okay, what is the plan, what do you intend to do, but then from an accountability point of view, it's very important that we can have a monitoring mechanism, and this is where a customized monitoring mechanism could be provided for these strategies. Lastly, we have dedicated indicators for also the local level. So it's no longer the national level only, but also at the local level, the local governments can coin their own indicators, better, good for their own context, for their own city, for their own district or province, and then they can report against that. So these are the advantages of what is there in terms of custom targets and indicators that are again provided in this Sendai framework monitor, the online system we have. The other one is, so you can imagine we talked about the national, we went one level down, we talked about customizing it for the country, we talked about the local, but then we're going one level higher. We look at the regional part. So this is a new feature we have added now, which is primarily led by the intergovernmental organizations like African Union, like Sephardic, or SARC or ASEAN, who are, and in the case of SIDS, you have CARICOM, you have SPC, who lead the process of developing the targets and indicator system. So the advantage is that the regional IGOs can coordinate and report on the report on the Sendai framework implementation at the regional level within their respective regions. So the advantage is they come up with one target or indicator and they can assign it to their member states who report against that, right? So it's very specific to them. There's also an opportunity of actually comparison. You know, you can have similar targets and indicators selected for both, let's say, Caribbean SIDS and Pacific SIDS. So then, you know, you have similar context. You can compare. So that's the advantage of, you know, having these customized targets and indicators for the regional level. Then you have the advantage is also there's a common platform for having or measuring the regional DRR strategies. As you know, almost all, I mean, there's hardly probably any major regional IGO who doesn't have a regional disaster reduction strategy, policy, or some kind of, you know, instrument that guides their work on DRR. And this regional target and indicators allow them to, again, just like in the case of national DRR strategies, the custom indicators allow them to monitor the national strategies. Here, this allows them to monitor their regional DRR strategies. And thirdly, it enables regional entities to showcase their work on DRR and you know, and actually show it. I mean, not just through publication, documentation, which is available through the system, it can, but beyond that also to actually get concrete results that they can showcase in different forums, in the like sustainable development forums, or, you know, the DRR platforms or climate forums, where it really shows in concrete terms that how one region is doing and what are the best practices that are coming out from there. So I will stop here and we look forward to questions on this from you, but I'll quickly hand over to the floor to my colleague Andrew, who will talk about the global risk assessment framework. Over to you, Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you, Rahul. Could you just advance to the next slide, please?
Yeah. I'm just switching off my camera. Yeah. Can you see my screen? Steve?
Perfect. Thanks so much. Thanks, colleagues. Now we want to shift somewhat to move to discuss the platform of how UNDRR works with UN member states to bring information to bear on disaster risk reduction. And I want to speak specifically about the disaster risk assessment framework, which some of you may have heard. This is a framework or an initiative that's global in orientation, that's looking to strengthen the capacity of UN member states to better use existing risk information, and by risk that includes information on vulnerability and on exposure, and the capacity to rebound from shocks and other events that are impacting variably people in different ways. As we all know, there is no one way to calculate vulnerability. What the graph is attempting to do is to facilitate UN member states to have better access to existing data sets. So whether that data set is looking at different vulnerability and exposure classifications to different types of risks, which we know changes over time and in space. The graph is meant to work in both development and humanitarian contexts, and also to stimulate more public and private investment in disaster risk reduction. So the graph has four broad service lines. As I mentioned, the first one is to make better use of the national disaster risk profiles. Essentially, that entails bringing to bear the myriad sources of data, and colleagues are aware, you know, whether you're UNICEF or OCHA or anybody, the world does not want for more data. What is a challenge for many UN member states, particularly SIDS and LDCs and landlocked countries, for that matter, are making best use of these data sets and knowing what they can be used for, what their gaps are, and how best to improve their utility, whether it's for investment planning, sector planning, just essentially to improve overall access to hazard, vulnerability, and risk information. And as we know, risks are becoming more systemic and interconnected in nature. The pandemic and certainly climate change continue to bear that out daily, and increasingly so for many countries. The second pillar relates to how we can help decision makers at national and subnational level address gaps in risk knowledge. And here UNDR's kind of ambition is really to move to the next generation of risk analytics in such a way that national and subnational partners can augment their capacity to take systemic risk assessment and use different methodologies. Again, there's no single methodology for how to do a systemic risk assessment that includes capturing vulnerabilities. That said, the intent is really how can we help countries embark on some innovative research partnerships. UNDR already maintains a partnership with more than 300 organizations and world experts, and we're looking to broker and bring that global knowledge network to bear for our UN member states. The third pillar is really around capacity building and strengthening risk knowledge, and here knowledge around vulnerability and how different people are affected differently by different risks and exposures. It's around capacity strengthening and developing some tools on risk analytics and using, for example, new technologies, artificial intelligence being one of them, to support better application of kind of anticipatory and preventative action for risk reduction. And then lastly, the graph is looking to move the dial on investment, influence decision makers and gatekeepers on financial flows, recognizing that we need to up our global ambition to deal with more systemic risk reduction. And here we're looking at partnering with specific global partners, all again through the focus on UN member states, UN country teams, RC offices, to ensure that UNDRR is in a position to provide some diagnostic support to countries that are looking at very variable data sets around vulnerability and exposure. And we're very keen to see how this conversation on SIDS is evolving. As part of the graph, we're looking to have a balance of phase 1 countries, and phase 1 runs up to 2023, with phase 2 running in alignment with the 2030 agenda. We do certainly want to include in our remit of support through the graph SIDS. We have some ongoing conversation with countries, but as colleagues will rightly understand, we're very much demand driven and working through the requests that we're getting both from national authorities but through UN country teams as well. So we're quite keen to see how the graph can collaborate with this effort on multi-dimensional vulnerability index for the SIDS. At the same time, we would want to share some cautionary notes around trying to prescribe one methodology for vulnerability assessments, which the evidence bears out that simply, as we all know, vulnerability is a very complex concept expressed in different ways in different cultures, different institutional settings, and we're quite keen to see through the graph how we can support more broadly this effort. I'll end there, and we're very keen to take the discussion forward. Thank you.
Thank you, team members. Laurel, is that it, or were there some closing remarks from the team? Okay, I see. Thank you for your attention. So I suppose that's it. All right, colleagues, we've heard. Thank you to both UNEP and UNDRR colleagues for